Hotline Miami 2 is shaped up to be just as much as an adrenaline-filled, beat-pounding gore fest as its predecessor. All of its fast-paced, twitchy gunplay is there, with more than enough punishment to be had over a retro electro soundtrack. The speedy, instant retry approach allowed me to blow through the first title in less than 4 hours in one night, but left me wanting more. It has exceeded my expectations, providing a longer, well-thought-out, action-packed experience, which is a hard task to pull off for such a simple game. With the only task of killing all the enemies your only objective, Denton Games was able to hold my attention through the very end, and I was urged to immediately replay it after the final credits rolled. This time around, there's a much more complex narrative as the setting and pacing spans across multiple characters, story arcs, and timelines. In Hotline Miami, you were playing for the thrill of the kill, and the game made it clear at the end that you don't need a reason to do it, but rather you do it because the game is built around the mechanics. With a light story and alternate timeline events overlapping between jacket and helmet, I didn't look too deep between the lines, and discovered through YouTube videos and forums that there was a secret ending that provided more insight as to who is behind the mysterious phone calls. It was a surreal experience, breaking the fourth wall with its standard ending, but kind of off-putting to those of us who are used to games with a clear, predictable outcome. Rather than making a statement about the reasoning behind games and why we play them, Hotline Miami 2 delivers a work of art that is open to interpretation, allowing different perspectives and takes on the morals and stories that are contained within. Instead of focusing on one character that has multiple masks, each character has a smaller selection of masks or accessories to choose from, giving them certain abilities to complement who they are. For example, when being presented with your mask choice for a chapter involving the Vigilantes, you can only choose from 4 masks, one representing each character in that group. While in the past, they usually just gave Jacket a unique perk, some characters you play as don't wear masks and rather have certain abilities or weapons to unlock during play. Other characters give you no choice at all between masks or weapons, forcing a unique style of play. For example, Evan can use nothing but blunt force swinging melee weapons. Unless you execute your enemies, he doesn't use lethal force, and every swinging attack merely disables your opponents. Presented with a myriad of playstyles along with creative level design, Hotline Miami 2 kept me on my toes by forcing me to adapt to the environments and character quirks. Some levels are straight up gunfights and slaughterfests, while others depend on careful stealth, luring, and tactics. This is mainly because level design is much different from the original. All enemy types make a return, and although they are skinned differently, you are fighting only a few different varieties. You have your standard sized enemies who take one shot to kill, you have your fat enemies who will kill you in close range and can take a few bullets, and a new charging, close quarters opponent that will dodge all gunfire. Other than dogs, that's pretty much it. Of course, there are different weapons that each enemy carries, changing their reach, speed of attack, and accuracy, but essentially it's more the same, and that's not a bad thing. With the soundtrack being a hallmark of the original, Wrong Number has big shoes to fill. It perfectly accompanies the moods as the story unfolds. There are nearly 50 tracks of pure brilliance that complement every moment from start to finish. I honestly didn't think that the tracks from Scattle and Moon covering Jacket's adventure could have been topped, and again, in the audio department my expectations were exceeded. You can actually purchase the soundtrack for $14.99 on Steam, and honestly is worth every penny for anyone who loved the soundtrack half as much as I did. Luckily, for those who don't want to purchase the soundtrack, some of the tracks are available on Spotify, but only about a third of them are available as of the writing of this review. So we have a new soundtrack, but most of the combat mechanics and enemies are the same. So what is new? Well, I found it to be much more difficult. I played the original with a 360 controller and struggled in certain parts, but I found it manageable. This time I played with a keyboard and mouse, and I don't know if I would have been able to even finish the first half without it. Those who have the game on console might have a more difficult time, and it all depends on your thumb accuracy. Levels are larger, they have more enemies, and there's a hell of a lot more windows. As a result, this requires an absurd amount of screen scanning along with quick long-range sniping precision. The general complaint sounding out from the community is that the levels are more dependent on sniping and cheese tactics. Because there's a lot more windows and unnoticed angles, you can be shot from far away, making combos a lot harder to chain together without a choke point. Just as before, one false step, one misclick, or one bad swing or shot will send you back to the beginning of the level unapologetically. Although Hotline Miami 2 is much more difficult, I found most of the levels to be fair, save for a few instances where the environment and mechanics are just tedious. For example, there's a nightclub level where the lights fluctuate from dark to dim, and the lack of light conceals the dogs and darkly dressed mobsters, remaining unnoticed until it's too late. And just like its predecessor, with every death, the enemies respawn with a slightly randomized configuration. I hated that fucking level with a passion. My other complaint was when I was playing as Beard. He cannot pick up enemy weapons, and you choose your starting weapon before embarking on your mission. Instead, you have to reload your weapon at ammo caches, which visually appear all over the level. Oddly, only one of the multiple crates will open, and you'll have to just know where it is. When you do manage to find it and resupply, you only get a quarter of your maximum ammo back, pressuring you into either switching to melee or doing repeated ammunition runs. This level has a massive population of enemies, making it arbitrarily difficult. But save for those two examples, as the story bounces around, the pacing is pretty much perfect, plunging you from an intense high-rise gunfight on one level and a small house call on the next. Those who are in it for the fluid clash of violence, Hotline Miami 2 will satisfy, as it is more or less mechanically the same. Even some of the odd bugs still exist, like spinning dogs and bouncing doors. But these things are minor and don't affect the overall playability of the game. For those looking for a captivating, worthwhile story, this game stands out in recent memory from all the rest. Moral symbolism is heavily played out through each story arc, all of which are thought-provoking and meaningful. Since the game bounces around from different timelines across about 10 hours of gameplay, it's a little hard to piece together everything that is going on in one playthrough. Since I recorded all my footage, it was easy for me to watch each narrative piece in detail, but a second playthrough is probably warranted for those who need some reiteration. A second go at it will provide a few extra scenes in the game, as well as the ability to play an unlocked hard mode in which the developers cleverly flipped each level into an upside-down perspective. I applaud the creative thinking to give the game a fresh new angle and a less repetitive feel. Hotline Miami 2 is an incredible game that is worth experiencing, if only once. Aside from the fluid mechanics, the story is its main attraction. Its complex, intertwined characters and story arcs cannot be discussed any further without spoilers. So if you don't want anything spoiled, quit watching now. There are 3 timelines that span across the entire game: the mid-80s, the late 80s, and the early 90s. For Hotline Miami 2, the devil is definitely in the details. I'm going to cover the lead characters' stories and how they cross paths rather than covering the time periods themselves. The game begins with a mock movie scene called Midnight Animal, where a man in a mask is being portrayed by an actor. He's called the Pig Butcher, or also known as Martin Brown. Acting as a quick tutorial to give you the basics of movement and attack, this short minute-long scene ends with the controversial raping of a woman after incapacitating her. Immediately after he motions with his pants down, a camera crew and director appear, revealing a staged part of a movie shoot. The next time we see Martin, he's on a talk show being interviewed about his latest film, Midnight Animal. There is a dialogue exchange that seems innocent at first, but Martin goes off the deep end and all crazy-eyed. He goes on and on about he's doing the film because he always wanted to kill kids and people. It's at this point we get our first glimpse of Richard as he appears in the audience and begins a conversation with him. He implies that this reality is all a dream and this quote-unquote movie is not a movie at all. Martin realizes this is a dream, and after he awakens, he's in a recognizable setting. The shot is what looks like Jacket's apartment, and the raped actress from the first scene is in captivity in his bathroom. Shortly after he awakens, she breaks free, and Martin is met at his door by the police. After being taken into custody, Martin explains to his interrogator that he was receiving the phone calls that told him to perform the rape and murders. Here in the interrogation room, a phone sits atop a desk, but it becomes clear that only Martin can see and hear it ringing. The interrogation officer states he cannot hear it, and he turns his back to exit the room, giving Martin an opportunity for escape. At this, the butcher picks up the phone, and he is instructed to use his chance to kill his captors. He butchers his way through the police station to the girl, and she shoots him after he opens the door looking for her, exclaiming, "I'm not your fucking girlfriend!" Afterwards, the production crew and set appears again, revealing the set of the movie. But the actress starts to cry after realizing the gun was loaded, as this is the last time we see Martin and the butcher. He is dead. What I find to be particularly interesting is that the movie set is never shown at the beginning of each of Martin's scenes, nor does he ever talk to the crew. There's only one other time they make an appearance outside of Martin's story, but I'll touch on this later. I feel that the phone represents the voices in his head as the motive and justification for his brutal crimes. Was it really a movie set? I don't think so. The comic book doesn't depict Martin as an actor, but rather some creepy middle-aged man. Before his murderous spree, he's watching a slasher flick. He comments on the quality of it, being low-rate and crummy. And he desires violence. His bloodthirst cannot be satisfied by this crummy B-rate horror. So to satiate his murderous appetite, he has to live it to fulfill his desires. Given the clues of the comic book and the odd placement of the movie set, I honestly believe that Martin is really just a psychopath. The next group of characters we are introduced to are the Vigilantes. This is a group of 5 presumably young fans who are inspired by the acts of Jacket, seeing him as a role model and an inspiration. They intend to follow in his footsteps so that the motives of street justice live on. The decision made to follow in his footsteps is made while watching him getting arrested on live television. They end up traveling around in a van, murdering lowlifes, drug dealers, junkies, and gangs just for the excitement and hopes that their actions will prompt phone calls from the 50 blessings. Imitation is the best form of flattery after all, as they emulate Jacket's style through the use of animal masks. Here we see Mark's bear mask for the first time, which is originally shown in the Payday 2 Hotline Miami DLC. The twin siblings adorn swan masks, while Corey's animal of choice is a zebra. It could be argued that Tony found a discarded mask of Jacket's, given the fact an identical one is worn by him in the original, minus the bloody stains. Even though they try to copycat him, they fail to get enough media attention to gain enough notoriety. A decision is made to up the ante, and they target a mob-owned club. They pull up, wipe the building clean, and their final splatter on the walls is the brutal beating of a henchman high on drugs. Leading up to being bludgeoned to death, the henchman approaches the now mob boss and asks for permission to quit. If you recall, the original mob boss was killed by Jacket at the end of the original game, and his son has taken up his leadership in his absence. To his surprise, the mob boss agrees under one stipulation, that he performs one last job for him. The henchman is sent to wipe out some gang rivals who have taken over some of their turf. For a man to be the boss's henchman and bodyguard, he must be skilled and capable in the art of combat. For the henchman, this final job is completed with ease, and he heads home victorious after the raid. Along with him is a big fat sack of cash, and with the wealth in hand breaks the good news of his freedom to his girlfriend before going to bed. After retiring for the night, he has a dream in which he is cruising down the freeway along with the bag of cash. Oddly enough, he's alone, but the mood is high. The sun is shining and all is good, when all of a sudden Richard appears in the back seat and the good weather turns to shit. Richard forebodes at his demise being close at hand. Running from his problems won't save him, as he is headed straight for a dead end. Upon waking, he finds his cash missing and his girlfriend gone. There's a note downstairs that said he would have done the same thing in her shoes. She took his cash and ran. In all likelihood, chances are he wanted out of the mob so he could spend the rest of his life with her, and the greedy bitch robbed him blind. It sends him into a spiral of self-pity, and he returns to the mob club to drown out his sorrows in a drug-induced state. This is the same club the Vigilantes targeted before brutally beating him to death. On his corpse, the Vigilantes find his cell phone and take it back to their hideout. While there, Richard makes an appearance, where he says some strange things that don't seem clear at the time. His appearance is interrupted by the mob boss's phone call to the late henchman's cell phone to see if he's changed his mind about leaving the mob. Without thinking, the boss inadvertently reveals the location of their hideout. After nobody responds after picking up the call, the phone is disconnected and the Vigilantes see this as their chance for a big hit. This is the only way that they would get noticed, if they took out a high priority target. I mean, there has to be somebody important in there, right? Prior to entering the building, they hatch a plan to work their way from bottom to top. There, they will escape by means of jumping to a neighboring roof. This level is incredibly intense and climactic. I found this to be one of my personal favorites, not only because you get to play as the Vigilantes in succession, but because the song played over and over is just so fitting for all the action. The pounding beat and staticky synthesizers, overture over gunshots and beatings, it's just perfect for the scene. As the perspective shifts through each character, the dialogue from Richard's earlier appearance becomes clear. As it turns out, he was parroting the future, saying things the Vigilantes were to say before they knew it. The level concludes with Alex and Ash trying to radio their squad prior to their rooftop escape. But it's at this moment where they realize they've lost the fight and there's nothing but radio silence. In a split moment, a gunman confronts them on the roof and executes them swiftly before they can even blurt out their last words. Detective Manny Parvo is a murder investigator who works for the Miami PD. When he's not enacting justice, he's investigating the Miami Mutilator case, where people are found dead and brutally murdered in a typical serial killer fashion. At each scene, there are clues and notes saying that they are forced to do it by odd phone calls, much like the pig butcher's excuse. He shows up in the aftermath of the Vigilantes' failed attack. The SWAT team has cornered the lone survivor of the raid, Tony, in a dead-end room in which he is ready to surrender.
Parvo barges in the room, pissed off, calling him a thug. He's so mad that he blows him away unexpectedly, which is weird for a cop. On his way out the door, he claims self-defense, which cannot be contradicted because it all went down without any witnesses. Leading up to Parvo's rendezvous with Tony, he's shown taking the law into his own hands, raiding mobster establishments and operations, always using his badge as an excuse. At the end of his sequences, the police always arrive just after his rampages. He is the lawless lawman, the judge, the jury, and the executioner, rather than a citizen who is sworn to protect and serve the people. But things aren't always as they seem. Why is he always taking on these dangerous raids solo? Is he just a renegade cop, or what the hell is his deal? As part of his job, Detective Parvo is shown visiting another scene of the Miami Mutilator. He goes home after talking to forensics investigators and goes to sleep. But later that night, he is freaking the fuck out, sweating, searching his apartment frantically because he's lost his gun. He sets out to look for it and returns to the most recent crime scene. There, seated at the table, an odd man sits with the detective's gun in front of him. Here it is revealed that Parvo, or rather his alter ego, is the one behind all of the killings. The arm of the law is actually the Miami Mutilator. He begins to have a meltdown and imagines what is going to happen to him as he is caught. The game plays through a level that represents his worst horror, where his boss actually accuses him with hard evidence and where he must fight against his peers for his life. Here, the same film crew makes an appearance as he's being accused by his boss, further cementing my theory that the camera crew is a representation of something rather than a set piece in the scene of the game. While serial killer cop dramas and slasher flicks make for popular entertainment, if these events unfolded in real life, they'd be pretty frightening. The community would be up in arms, the news would be all over it like white on rice, and it would be a controversial hot topic around the water cooler. The game is making a statement about the public's twisted sense of entertainment. Unironically, while we play a game focused on brutally killing anything that stands in your way. Another meaning I see in this is by drawing comparisons between Parvo and Martin. One is portrayed as an everyday lowlife, while the other holds a position of power that is seen as respectable in the public's eye. Both the Miami Mutilator and the Pig Butcher use the excuse of imaginary phone calls as their reasoning behind their murders. How we see those on their respective social ladders in real life versus the game is an accurate imitation of real life. No matter who you are on the outside, you can have some deep dark secrets on the inside. No matter what position you hold in life, you're always susceptible to temptation, abuse of power, and greed for self-satisfaction. The camera crew only shows up in psychotic breakdowns, in dream-induced states of the butcher and the detective, representative of their psychotic need for their perverted bloodlust. They're not so different after all. What the only difference is that Manny is more capable of getting away with it for longer. Manny killed mobsters because he loved it. He loved every second of it, and when some scum like the Vigilantes got more recognition for it than he did, he eradicated Tony without thinking twice. To further support this theory, when Pardo was talking to his reporter friend Evan, he suggests he should write a book about the Mutilator rather than the murders going on at the time, implying that he wants more recognition. This is the last you see of Detective Parvo until the credits roll. You get your first glimpse of Evan and Jacket in Hawaii in 1985. Evan doesn't have much relevance in this time period, but there are 5 characters in this timeline of special note. Jacket and Beard, aka the Soldier, Scarf and Colonel Daniels, and Dreadlocks. During their first introduction, Jacket and Beard are shown getting their picture taken by Evan after some quality drinking time with each other. The comic book foreshadowing tells us they're part of a special forces outfit called the Ghost Wolves, an elite unit much like the Navy SEALs in real life. The United States are in conflict with the Russians in an alternate history in which the Cold War had escalated to physical conflict. Beard is a skilled tactician and an efficient killing machine. The model soldier, he can keep his calm and do what he's told. He can follow orders even if it means possibly walking into his death. But his loyalty is to his friends and his unit, namely Jacket. His unit is tasked with taking strategic bases and collecting valued intel from the enemy. Morale runs low as they run out of booze and have no backup. Most of the events that take place in Hawaii focus on Beard, with Dreads and Scarf taking a backseat to the narrative. Near the end of the Hawaiian timeline, their unit commander Colonel freaks out while drunk and places a bloody panther head on his face in front of the soldiers. He exclaims that they are all animals and only do it for the thrill to kill, not knowing the motives for why they fight the war. They are sent to what might be their last mission, but Beard, Jacket, and Scarf all survive in spite of the odds. After they assault and capture the power plant, Dreadlocks dies and Jacket is injured in an explosion. Jacket is saved by none other than Beard. He carries him out of a collapsing tunnel underneath the station just before everything detonates. While waiting for medical evac, Beard gives Jacket the Polaroid taken days before to remind him of who saved his ass. This is the last of the war that we see, as Scarf, Jacket, and Beard all survive the conflict in Hawaii. Beard ends up moving to San Francisco and is operating a shop there, living up his post-war days in relaxation. There's a scene where Beard is talking on the phone, having a conversation with an old friend. It's somewhat familiar. We've all had conversations like this at one point or another in our lives. You know, the ones where we forget the importance of a relationship because of the obligations and routine of real life. After the phone is hung up, Beard walks outside and sadly doesn't get another chance to talk to his dear friend Jacket, who still owes him the Polaroid of the two of them from the war. If you recall, in Hotline Miami 1, after Jacket kills the mob boss, he throws what looks like a picture off of the balcony. This is significant because the clerk throughout Hotline Miami 1 appears to be Beard, but it's really just a figment of his imagination. After Jacket is enlisted by the 50 Blessings to reenact murder and bloodshed after all those years after the war, it could be argued that Beard's appearance in each store are figments of his imagination. More of a representation of the lost deep bonds with the casualties of war, wishing his friend was there alongside him to be level-headed and cool like he was back in the war. But war affects everyone differently. Anti-Russian tensions have reached a high after the war ending with the nuking of San Francisco, prompting nationalistic marches and over-the-top patriotism. Jake is a lower middle-class junkyard employee who feels the ripples of war. He's a concerned citizen who feels victimized by everything in its wake. He loves his country, and anyone who doesn't support America is a Russian sympathizer. He finds a flyer for the 50 Blessings, which proclaims to maintain the integrity of America by opposing Russian tyranny. What patriot wouldn't do what he could for his country? He signs up right away to be a part of the organization that holds the same beliefs as him. He attends an anti-Russian protest rally where pressures escalate quickly, resulting in the brutal beatings of Russian civilians. He returns home to find a snake mask in a box at his doorstep. He begins receiving phone calls and messages and doesn't realize where they are coming from. He's unable to put two and two together, but he ends up doing their bidding anyway. After all, he gets to enact revenge for what they did to San Francisco while serving his country in a way he wasn't able to before. He ventures into the 50 Blessings clubhouse and pitches an idea to his local representative. He explains that a group of their size and power could actually do some good in the world. He proposes that they make anonymous phone calls, much like the ones that he's receiving. But mid-conversation, he has an epiphany and he realizes that they are the ones that are making the calls. This tips off the representative, knowing that somebody is now hot on their trail. Before they can act on it, Jake ends up leaving to perform his most recent assignment. He sets out, and on the level called Withdrawal, you play as Jake while clearing a building of Russians. Now, if Jake dies on the final floor, you do not get an opportunity to try again, but rather the Russians will drag him into a familiar-looking room. He's asked for his last words, in which he spits at them before taking a bullet to the head. However, if Jake survives and clears the building, you see him surprised by the 50 Blessings representative on his way out the door. The rep picks up Jake and takes him over to their clubhouse. Jake's a little confused by all this, and he asks the rep if anyone is keen on their secret. Upon returning from a coffee break, the representative pulls out a gun and shoots Jake in the face for discovering the true motives behind the 50 Blessings. Here we have a deviation and an alternate timeline within the game itself. Which one is canonically correct? Well, I would say that the Russians killing him would be. In Hotline Miami 1, in order to get the snake mask, you have to find it on a corpse in the exact same looking room. I feel that this is no coincidence. But really, who knows? I mean, this game can get a little screwed with alternate outcomes. I mean, even the Jacket and Biker standoff, obviously Jacket had to live in order for the events of this game to come to fruition. And Richter must be spared by Jacket in order for his story to occur. Even more confusing is the fact that there's a secret scene with Biker and Evan, as long as you can unlock it. And then there's a scene where somebody who looks like Biker is standing outside of a courthouse protesting. It's just also confusing. It seems that both of the secrets that exist in this game are really just to pay fan service to the original, and maybe shed some light on the lore that is the world of Hotline Miami. You had to unlock the secret in the original just to get the proper ending. For those of you who are not aware, the secret ending to Hotline Miami reveals that the janitors are part of an organization called the 50 Blessings, whose secret motives are to topple the Russian influence in America. Remember that Richter was sent by the janitors to shoot Jacket because he was a force to be reckoned with. This time around, you get Richter's story and why he went along with their plan. All of the events in Richter's story occur as reenactments during an interview between him and Evan. Richter started getting phone calls, and his refusal to comply was only met with threats. After he ignored them for long enough, one day his car ended up being torched in his driveway. I'm under the impression that Richter might be an ex-con. It's very, very difficult for him to find work. He has nothing to his name, and he lives with his mother. His mother is sick though, so it's a win-win situation for both of them. He gets to look after her while she provides a roof over his head. But after these phone calls and threats turn into deadly force and action, he is scared for his mother's life. Scared for her safety, he is forced to go along with their assignments to keep his mother alive. After performing various house calls and assignments, he is then given the task to go and kill Jacket and his girlfriend. This is where they have their rendezvous and Jacket spares his life. I might have missed it, but I'm not quite clear on exactly when Richter gets arrested.
Another possibility could be that Richter was shot by Jacket and he survived and was arrested thereafter.
Regardless, he ends up getting arrested around the time that Jacket does, and while being locked up he gets a visit from the janitors. They pay him a visit to thank him for his service and to tie up some loose ends. Fortunately for Richter, they're unable to put him out of his misery because he's incarcerated. Shortly after their visit, a prison riot occurs and Richter escapes to seek refuge in Hawaii. In exchange for his account of events, Evan agrees to purchase a ticket to Hawaii for Richter's sick mother so he can look after her. Evan's story arc ends with his interview with Richter, but Evan has a unique personality compared to all the others. He's a failing reporter who's having marital issues because he obsesses over getting his next big story, but this is not without merit. He's poor and he's out of money. He's the one who took the photo of Jacket and Beard in Hawaii, and it could be said that the war helped foster his success as a reporter. I speculate this, as his niche for war reporting ends, his career ends up going nowhere. Regardless, the game progresses and you can see the clues indicating the animosity his wife has regarding his career and lack of income. While on the subway to Richter's mother's house, he gets a visit from Richard. The rooster advises Evan to rethink his priorities soon as time is running out. Unlike the other characters, Evan doesn't use sharp weapons or guns. With the exception of his execution moves, he's limited to blunt force swinging weapons. They only disable his attackers, not kill them. He exacts restraint as he is a man of good judgment acting in self-defense rather than bloodlust. Although his scenes of combat feel really out of place to me, he has a crucial role to play in the narration of Richter's story, which helps relate the game further to the original. He's also shown talking to the police during Parvo's nightmare, hinting that he may know the truth regarding the true identity of the Miami Mutilator. Evan's part isn't substantial, but it helped me with the pacing of the game, mixing in a non-lethal character and a unique playstyle. Depending on how you play Evan depends on how he's depicted in the final scene of the game. I haven't quite figured out what you have to do in order to have the ending with his family or without, but it's true that the focal point of Evan is that he is striving to do something for somebody else. The complete and polar opposite of Evan is the mob boss's son, who has inherited his father's shaken crime empire after Jacket's rampage. This guy's a power-hungry, greedy, brutal gangster of stereotypical proportions. I mean, he's the epitome of a bad guy. Complete with a crazy look in his eye and a badass attitude, the world is his for the taking. In an attempt to bring his gang back to power, he wages war on a rival Colombian gang, striking their headquarters, chop shops, and clubs. In addition to conquering new turf, he executes a successful bank heist in which he acquires a pile of cash. He relocates to new headquarters and decides to party with a bunch of new drugs. In his blissful happiness, he calls his old henchman friend, wondering if he might have reconsidered his resignation from the mob. Instead of his former henchman answering, this is when the vigilantes pick up the call. Nonchalantly, he expresses his accomplishment by inviting him to come down and party with him. When no one answers on the other end, he hangs up. He shrugs it off, takes a few more pills, and leans back, but he overdoes it. He sinks into a hallucinogenic state where he starts to have a really bad trip. Bright colors, tracers, the whole 9 yards. With his inability to think straight, dream melds with reality. In his mind, he can't get a grip, and he's plunged into combat with various animal-like apparitions and phantasms. Richard makes an appearance here, but rather than talking to the mob boss, he's in the form of an enemy holding a gun. I find it fitting, as he is almost always an angel of death. The boss's lackeys are strewn across the floor in all parts of the building, and he's almost always seen with a weapon at his disposal. Sometimes it's an axe, a shotgun. In the illusion, he combats with a vicious bear, a charging zebra, a ghost-like tiger, concluding with a multi-headed swan. Being that this is the only part of the game that is really abstract and odd, at first I didn't know what was going on. I had completely forgotten about the henchman's cell phone.
It didn't even dawn on me that the boss was the one who made the phone call.
The moment when he walks up to the roof, it was crystal clear to me what had happened. He was the mobster who brings the demise of Alex and Ash. He was the deciding factor of whether they lived or died. After their eradication and before the first set of credits roll, he walks through a golden gate onto a rainbow bridge. What I thought was Mark's body at the base of the building was actually the mob boss's. I thought it was pretty cool that they alluded to the fact that Mark was a fat ass that couldn't jump off the rooftop, and that was him who was actually dead at the base of the building. It was a pretty cool little twist. Anyway, after the first set of credits roll, we get a second cutscene, which really ties up the whole universe in the end of the game. You see Richter sitting with his mother in Hawaii. They're watching TV when a news announcement explains a coup has occurred, resulting in the death of the US and Russian presidents. The newscast explains that the uprising was led by a US Army general and that the Russians would see this as an act of war. Some speculate that the general might be the former colonel of Beard and Jacket from the Ghost Wolves in 1985, but there's really no evidence to support this. Throughout various scenes of the game, there are newspapers that detail all the political contention and the arranged meeting of the political figures. The television fizzles out, and Richter's mother is replaced by Richard. His foreboding dialogue is much more on the comforting side this time around, assuring Richter there is nothing he can do about his imminent end. Sirens blare as Russian nukes hit Hawaii, Miami in retaliation. One by one, we see our surviving cast of characters disintegrated. Parvo is in the midst of a paranoid mental breakdown, alone in his apartment with his gun pointed at the door. Evan, with or without his family, is shown eating at a table. The actress is sitting alone on the couch. Jacket's doing time in a cell, and then the scene fades to black as they all die. Restarting the game after your first playthrough will give you a scene with a playable character sitting around a table. Richard, the angel of death and the voice of destruction, talks to all of them. This is the only scene that Richard talks to Beard, as Beard is one of the few characters who is loyal to his country, his friends, and himself. They all end up dead in the beginning, just like in the end. Then the film Midnight Animal rolls. Any piece of media that provokes thought and discussion is a true work of art. The last time that something occupied my mind for days after its conclusion was the HBO series The Wire. Like The Wire, Hotline Miami 2 imitates life. Parallels drawn between it and real life are so strong that it invokes a lot of thought-provoking conversation. Not to mention, some of the mystery in the game, there's a lot to debate and uncover and share from one person to the next. Conversation could be had for days about what the events in the game actually mean, and it can vary from person to person. I mean, for God's sakes, I've gone on for over half an hour about the game, and I haven't even covered all the little small hints and clues and a lot of things that I probably missed. Think of how many Jakes that we have all met, or vigilantes that strive to be nothing more than something else. Then consider how few Beards and Evans exist in the world. Loyalty and truth are hard to come by. Think of how America is a dark place where police abuse their privilege and deranged psychopaths walk the streets at night. Recognize that they are on opposite sides of the fence, yet they are similar in the fact that they appeal to their own personal power fantasies. Then consider how cruel time can be. Without enough of it, you wish you had more of it to spend, and with too much, you carry a burden of regret. Thanks for watching.